Hello everyone. Today we continue our journey through the Bible. It's day 38 of our reading, and we will be reading Leviticus chapters 22 to 24. So, chapter 22 still contains some important regulations. First, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Tell Aaron and his sons to treat with respect the sacred offerings the Israelites consecrate to me, so they will not profane my holy name. I am the Lord." That is to say, even though Aaron and his descendants are priests, they cannot casually touch the sacred offerings that the Israelites have set apart for the Lord. So, as priests, their work within the tent of meeting also has strict boundaries. So, which things can be touched and which cannot? Which things can be eaten and which cannot be eaten? Later, it also mentions Aaron's descendants. If any of them are unclean, have leprosy, a discharge, or have become unclean by touching a corpse, then they cannot eat. They cannot eat these sacred offerings given to Aaron and the priests, such as some of the sin offerings, or some of the wave offerings and heave offerings. So then, they must wait until they are cleansed before they can eat. So, continuing with the people outside a priest's family, they are not allowed to eat. If a priest buys a slave with money, and that person becomes part of the priest's household, then they are allowed to eat. If the priest's daughter marries an outsider, she can no longer eat the sacred offerings. However, if the priest's daughter becomes a widow or is divorced, has no children, and returns to her father's house, then she can eat again. So there are very detailed regulations. So here it talks about the priests. As priests, when they are serving the Lord, they must not profane the holy name of the Lord. Then starting from verse 17, it also talks about the Israelites bringing offerings. Which offerings are not acceptable? We see that some offerings, such as those that are blind, injured, or deformed, right? These cannot be offered. Those with missing limbs are not acceptable. They cannot be offered because earlier, when the regulations were explained in detail, the Lord made it very clear. Whether it is a bull, a male goat, or a male sheep, it must be 1 year old, and it must be without defect, without blemish, and whole. It must be completely whole, and the animal should be offered to the Lord when it is at its strongest and best. But we know that in the hundreds of years that followed, the Israelites often did not do this in their sacrifices. Because in people's eyes, a bull or a ram is enormous and represents a great deal of wealth. If they offered a sacrifice and completely burned it as a burnt offering, they would feel it was a great loss. So people would offer animals that were defective, useless, or sick to God instead. So you can see that by that time, the reason people thought this way was actually because they no longer understood why they needed to offer sacrifices. They simply regarded sacrifices as gifts to the Lord. Since it was a gift for him, they didn't want to give their best things. They wanted to keep the best for themselves. They didn't understand that the purpose of sacrifice was to help them realize that salvation comes from the Lord. And how this salvation substitutes, how, through the substitutionary death of the sacrificial offering, it comes upon people, they were unable to comprehend this. They couldn't receive the Lord's grace with a heart of gratitude. So, when it comes to the book of Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, God, through the mouth of the prophet, severely rebukes these people for their long-standing failure in this area, for offering sacrifices that are not pleasing or acceptable to the Lord. Alright, so chapter 23 talks about the festivals of the Lord. What does that mean? In general, the festivals are about setting apart certain days from the Israelites' daily lives and from their entire calendar. These days are to be dedicated to the Lord. They are days for worship, days for offering sacrifices, and days for giving thanks. So these days belong to God. That's why they're called the festivals of the Lord. The Israelites are God's people. Not only did God bring them out of Egypt and plan to bring them into Canaan, not only did he give them the law to obey, but through these festivals, he also wanted to show the Israelites that their entire lives are actually under God's control. They belong to God as well. So, broadly speaking, the Sabbath is also considered one of the festivals of the Lord. You are to work for 6 days, and on the 7th day, you are to observe the Holy Sabbath. Of course, we will talk later about how the Jewish Sabbath is on Saturday, while for us Christians, the Sabbath is on Sunday. So, which day is it exactly? Well, in the regulations regarding the Sabbath, it says you are to work for 6 days and rest on the 7th. In fact, what is given here is a cycle, a 7-day cycle. And within these 7 days, 1 day needs to be set aside as the Sabbath. So the first 6 days are for work, and the 7th day is the Holy Sabbath. This is also a kind of festival. Then, looking further, the important festivals include the Passover. We are very familiar with the Passover, Exodus chapter 12. The Israelites were saved by God through the Passover lamb. The Passover is on the 14th day of the first month, so the 14th day of the first month is the Lord's Passover. Then, from the 15th to the 21st, these 7 days are actually the festival of unleavened bread. So, during these 7 days, they had to eat unleavened bread, which represents that the Israelites had become holy and could not be tainted by sin or impurity. However, in many later Old Testament accounts, such as in Kings and Chronicles, over time they gradually referred to the entire period from the 14th to the 21st as Passover. This is also acceptable. Now, there is another very important festival called the Festival of the First Fruits. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you and you reap its harvest, bring to the priest a sheaf of the first grain you harvest. He is to wave the sheaf before the Lord, so it will be accepted on your behalf. The priest is to wave it on the day after the Sabbath." This is called the Festival of First Fruits. Then you must also offer a burnt offering and a grain offering as prescribed. This is because God not only brought them into the land of Canaan, but also provided them with everything they needed there. So what day is the Festival of First Fruits? Actually, it falls on the 16th day of the first month. The Festival of First Fruits actually takes place during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So the 14th day of the first month is Passover. The 15th to the 21st is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the 16th is the Festival of First Fruits. Of course, the Festival of First Fruits was not celebrated by the Israelites while they were in the wilderness. It was only after they had left the wilderness and entered Canaan that they were to observe the Festival of First Fruits, because it was in Canaan that they would harvest crops. But then, why was it necessary to tell them about it now? Actually, as we can see from later passages in Deuteronomy, there is a reason for this. For the Israelites, the journey from Egypt to Canaan through the wilderness actually only required 11 days. They could have entered Canaan in just 11 days. In fact, those 11 days meant they could have possessed the land almost immediately. But due to sin, Israel wandered for 40 years. Similarly, the Festival of Weeks began after entering Canaan. It is counted from the Festival of First Fruits wave offering. Count 7 Sabbaths, 49 days, then add 1 day to reach 50. So, the Festival of Weeks starts from the 16th day of the first month, and after 50 days, that time is the Festival of Weeks. Now, in the New Testament, it is called Pentecost. Pentecost is this Festival of Weeks. So, what date is the Feast of Weeks? It's the 6th day of the third month, according to the Israelite calendar. And during the Feast of Weeks, at that time, they also had to offer new grain to the Lord. The Festival of Weeks is also about giving thanks. It is also to give thanks to God for the abundant provision He has given them. So after the Festival of Weeks on March 6th, there is the Festival of Trumpets on July 1st. On July 1st, the Israelites are to blow the trumpets as a memorial and observe a Sabbath. The meaning of the Festival of Trumpets is to bring the entire congregation of Israel before the Lord to ask for His grace. Blowing the trumpet is a call for assembly action. Why the assembly? Because July 10th is the Day of Atonement. You may remember we talked about this earlier. The high priest could only enter the Holy of Holies once a year, passing through the curtain to offer sacrifices for himself and for the entire congregation of Israel. Therefore, July 10th is the Day of Atonement for the entire congregation of Israel. It is to be observed as a sacred assembly, and everyone must deny themselves. No work is to be done, because this is the great Day of Atonement, which occurs only once a year. Alright, so after the 10th day of the 7th month, 5 days later comes the Festival of Tabernacles. The Festival of Tabernacles is from the 15th to the 21st day of the 7th month, also lasting 7 days. Now, the purpose of the Festival of Tabernacles is very clear. God said it is to commemorate how He brought the Israelites out of Egypt and into Canaan, and how they lived in booths during that journey. I am the Lord your God. In fact, according to God's original plan, as just mentioned, it should have taken only 11 days to travel from Egypt to Canaan, and in those 11 days, during that time, God would still protect them and had a very detailed plan to keep them safe through those 11 days. Not only would He have them live in booths, but He also would provide them with manna and gave them water. So after traveling through the wilderness for 11 days, they would be able to enter. They would enter Canaan, but in reality, as we just mentioned, the ancestors of the Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years because of their sins. 40 years. During those 40 years, God still protected them, and they also lived in booths. So now, when the Israelites celebrate the Festival of Tabernacles, it is to commemorate God's protection in the wilderness. It is also meant to serve as a reminder of the sins the Israelites committed during that time in the wilderness. Alright, so here these important festivals are listed. In fact, the most important are 3 festivals. One is the Passover. Another is the Festival of Weeks, which is Pentecost. And the third is the Festival of Tabernacles. These are the 3 major festivals for the Israelites. What are the 3 major festivals for us Chinese people? For us, the most important official festival is the Spring Festival, which is a time for family reunions. In fact, it's making the family an idol. National Day is about making the nation an idol, and Labor Day is about making one's own abilities an idol. Actually, from the festivals a nation celebrates, you can see whom they truly worship. Alright, let's move on to chapter 24. Here, we see that the Lord gives very detailed instructions about lighting the lamps. Aaron, besides his other duties, also has to light the lamps. These lamps must burn from evening until morning. As priests, they are responsible for lighting the lamps on the golden lampstand. These lamps are to remain continually lit. They are to be an everlasting statute. Then, fine flour is to be used to make 12 loaves of the showbread, and there are instructions on how to arrange them on the table of showbread. These loaves are given to Aaron and his sons to eat. So, the passage explains how the lamps are to be maintained and how the bread is to be prepared. This is explained at the end of the chapter. So earlier, it repeatedly emphasized not to blaspheme the Lord, not to profane the name of the Lord. Even Aaron and his sons, as priests, should only touch what they are supposed to touch and eat what they are supposed to eat. They must absolutely not touch what they are not allowed to and must never profane the holy name of the Lord. It also talks about the descendants of Israel. Then, at the end, an incident happens. The son of an Israelite woman, whose father was an Egyptian. At that time, there were indeed some mixed people among the Israelites, because when the Israelites were in Egypt, there were certainly some intermarriages with Egyptians. Intermarriage was possible. So this child, during a quarrel with someone, blasphemed the holy name of the Lord and cursed. So this is the first thing. Just before, it was mentioned that if someone blasphemes the holy name of the Lord, what should you do? What should be done? These commandments are given, and immediately there is an incident that violates them. So what should be done in this situation? The instructions are very clear. The person who curses the holy name must be brought outside the camp. First, take him outside the camp. Then, those who heard him must lay their hands on his head, meaning that all the guilt is placed on him and not on the rest of the Israelites. Then the whole assembly must stone him to death. So the Lord commanded, anyone who curses their God will be held responsible. Anyone who blasphemes the name of the Lord will be put to death. The entire assembly must stone him. Whether foreigner or native born, when they blaspheme the name, they are to be put to death. So we see that when the Lord's name is blasphemed, God's instructions are actually very clear. First, the person must be put to death. Second, this execution must be carried out publicly, with the entire assembly together stoning him to death. This is meant to serve as a strong and powerful warning, but we know that later on, the Israelites themselves committed acts of blasphemy. It was the entire assembly together blaspheming the name of the Lord, wasn't it? In the wilderness, they blasphemed the name of the Lord countless times, and countless times they did not believe in the Lord's commands. So God repeatedly said that, in fact, according to the law, he could have destroyed them all in an instant. May the Lord help preserve the Israelites who, as God's people, received God's law. God made it very clear, those who obey will be blessed, and those who violate it will be cursed. This applies to individuals, and it also applies to the entire community. When you get to the book of Deuteronomy, Moses explains it even more clearly. I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. So, throughout the Mosaic covenant, God brought them out of Egypt and gave them the law. God made it very clear, if you obey this law, what will you be? You will be my kingdom of priests and a holy nation. But the Israelites failed again and again, over and over. That's why a new covenant was needed. It wasn't until the book of Jeremiah that a new covenant was introduced, one that brings change from within, not just external constraints. Of course, all these laws are to be directly applied in God's future plan of redemption. Jesus Christ himself would come to fulfill the true meaning of these laws. Lord, please help us and continue to guide us in our daily Bible reading. By now, we should have gradually developed this habit, and may this habit stay with our children for life. As we keep building a solid foundation on the Word of God, we are truly grateful to the Lord.